And welcome once again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr, joined by Juan Zarate, our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great to see you.
Let's talk a little bit about cyber and the potential for cyber warfare. The administration now is coming out increasingly and naming names. And the name at the top of the list of cyber enemies is China.
Right. We saw this last year, Bob. Remember an intelligence report from the U.S. government that actually named the Chinese and the Russians as the principal cyber hacktivists around the world. The government has typically been very reticent to name names, but as you said, not only the U.S. government has been more willing to do this, but private sector actors. And we saw this report that's come out from the private sector security company that's been working with the New York Times that laid out very specifically who is behind a number of the most significant cyber espionage, cyber economic attacks that we've seen out of China, pinpointing on the map an office outside of Shanghai belonging to the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, that is the source of a number of high-level and important cyber espionage attacks. And so what you're seeing is increasing specificity in terms of attribution of these attacks, which had once been seen as ethereal, part of the cyberspace domain, but now getting more and more specific, which will require a more and more specific response.
Of course, the Chinese have denied this. They say they're not engaging in state-sponsored cyber attacks. The Mandian Corporation, though, said they've pinpointed it down to the block, the building. They leave little doubt about this. But the question is, what do we do about it?
Well, I think that's the huge question. I think the Chinese are going to hide behind the veil of difficulty of attribution in cyberspace, and they've done that in a couple of ways. One, they've got special units that do this kind of work, like this PLA unit outside of Shanghai. They have quasi-state-sponsored, college students and cyber hacktivists that are engaged in attacks that support their activities. Bear in mind the recent attacks on the New York Times. And so there's a sort of a layer that they've built around attribution. It's very difficult to really pinpoint with hard evidence. And you've heard the language of, give me proof, let me see the hard evidence from the Chinese. So they've built that defense in the first instance. But your question is the most important one, which is, what do you do about it? We know that the Chinese are doing this. I mean, we may not be able to prove it in a court of law. With impunity. What do we do about it, especially with the second largest economy in the world, one that's entangled with the U.S. in terms of trade, in terms of financing our debt, in terms of relations in Asia and in key issues like North Korea, Iran, et cetera. So how do you respond in a way that doesn't ratchet up the pressure, doesn't create a trade war, doesn't create further mistrust, when in fact you need to ratchet down the pressure, and frankly get the Chinese to stop doing this?
Some security experts, some private security experts are saying, as a first step, the United States ought to come out and say, look, enough is enough. We've put up with the theft of hundreds of billions of dollars, and we've done it with no repercussions. Going forward, there has to be some kind of penalty paid.
Yeah, absolutely right. The head of the Cyber Command, head of the National Security Agency, Keith Alexander, has called this the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history. Billions of dollars worth of intellectual property and research and development taken not just from the government, but from private sector actors. And so absolutely, the time is now to say enough is enough. And I think that's why you're going to see both in public and private higher level discussions about these issues. And no doubt this will have to be part of the president's agenda when he meets and talks with Chinese leadership. Same thing with Secretary of State Kerry and his counterparts, as well as the military counterparts. But I think you may start to see some other actions that the U.S. government can take. The Department of Justice may start some investigations. You may see some regulatory actions. You may even see, as we saw, for example, in the field of terrorist financing, which is near and dear to my heart, some executive orders that deal with cyber hacking. And so you'd have an executive order related to an economic emergency, which is what these executive orders are often about, that then targets those actors, individuals in the Chinese military, individuals in the Chinese government, private sector actors or groups or companies that are engaged in this kind of activity that is a threat to U.S. economic integrity and national interest. And I think that may be a way of being able to name and shame, to put some evidence on the table, and to start putting restrictions on financial flows and even travel for some of these individuals. That's one way of making this public, and one thing that you may see from the administration.
Well, the first key step is there's now an acknowledgement, a public acknowledgement, this is a real problem.
That's exactly right.
We'll keep an eye on it too.
Thanks,
Juan,
Bob.
thanks. And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. We'll see you again next time. I'm Bob Orr.